Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, 2015 Wrap-Up and 2016 Look Ahead with Ovum Research and IBM. Today we're joined by Richard Absalom and Jonathan Dale. Richard is a principal analyst with Ovum's Enterprise Mobility and Productivity practice, particularly focusing on mobile consumerization. His research examines the impact that mobile devices and applications designed for consumers are having on the corporate environment. Jonathan works closely with several teams in the IBM security group, including analyst relations, public relations, and customer advocacy to help successfully transition FiberLink to be an integral part of IBM. Jonathan helped lead the victorious transformation of FiberLink and its industry-acclaimed Mass 360 platform in becoming a top player in the enterprise mobility management space. My name is Kayla Heineman, and I'll be your moderator today. Real quick, just a few housekeeping items before we begin. If you've joined a webinar with us in the past, then you might notice we have a new look. We are using the On24 webinar platform to enhance your webinar experience. The webinar console is completely customizable, so you can enlarge the slides and minimize the speaker bios and Q&A box. So we hope you take advantage and play around with your console. This webinar is expected to last about 60 minutes and is in listen-only mode. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so if you have a question you'd like answered, please be sure to submit it through the Q&A box located on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to minimize this box if you'd like. And finally, we are recording today's session, and we'll make the link to the recording and slides available by email. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to go ahead and pass it off to Jonathan to kick it off with today's agenda. Jonathan?
Kayla, thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Richard and I have a great program for you today. Richard, are you out there?
Yeah, hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me today.
Wonderful, and thanks for joining us. As Kayla mentioned, please feel free, as we're speaking, to get your Q&A in. We will try to get to them as Richard and I are speaking and working through slides, so please do so. We'd love to hear from you. The other thing we want to do is we want to get started with an icebreaker poll of the day. So here it is. So please participate in our poll. It's the icebreaker poll of the day. How mature is BYOD in your organization? We've been talking about BYOD forever. So how mature is it? 4 choices. We're still ignoring it, or we're ignoring it still. It's a 2016 initiative for us, right? So it's coming up. We're going to get to it next year. We're still trying to find a balance. What does this mean? Well, it means we're working through BYOD, what it means to our company. We're testing out policies, solutions to manage it. We're dealing with it, but we're still trying to find a balance. And then my favorite, which is yawn. Okay. We have policy, we have management already implemented. We're there, we are ready for the next mobile challenge. All right, so let's take a look at what these polls are going to show. All right, 50% still finding the balance. I don't think that's a surprise. Richard?
No, that sounds about right. Yeah, it's a good place to kick off here, because that's some of the things I was going to talk through and bring up around that mismatch we see between employee behavior and what IT is doing. Yeah, I've been at Ovum for about 4.5 years talking about BYOD, and so I was almost expecting more to yawn about it, because we've been talking about it for a while. But yeah, there is, we know there's still a lot of work to do in terms of getting management of all these types of devices, these personal devices, for all the people that are actually using them. But encouraging to see a fair proportion of people there as well saying, we've already got that kind of in place and implemented.
Yes, as I mentioned, that 37.5%, so almost 40% that say they have a policy implemented and management implemented already. I think that's great, right? It shows how far along some companies have come. But I do not look at the 50%, still trying to find a balance, as a negative. In fact, I look at that as very positive, because BYOD is very personal, both to, obviously, the users, but to organizations, and depending on what industry you're in or what use cases those devices are being used for, trying to balance that, personal versus corporate, privacy for users. So it can be a very complex topic. It's encouraging to see that most companies here overall are at least doing something about it or have done something about it and are ready for that next mobile initiative.
Yeah, and I would actually say that, I'm surprised that 12.5% are ignoring it, but I think I'm more surprised that 12.5 aren't aren't tackling it in 2016. So that's a whole nother year that they're going to be ignoring it. And, with all the hype around it and security, considerations that have been going around lately, I'm really surprised by that.
Yeah. So if you're part of that 12.5%, we won't point you out, but please send us a Q&A, and why are you ignoring it, or why isn't it a 2016 objective? We'd love to hear that and understand it. All right, Richard, I'll turn it over to you so you can really kick this thing off.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, so just very quickly, for those of you who may not have come across or heard of Ovum before, we're an international research house focusing on IT and telecoms, based here in the UK, but with global coverage. So I'm based over in London, and yeah, as mentioned, I've been here about 4.5 years covering mobility, consumerization, BYOD, and we've really started to identify some patterns and trends. And the crux of the team that I'm with and what our research is based on is this idea that we're all consumers first and foremost. So we bring the behaviors that we have in our consumer lives, in our personal lives, into the workplace with us more and more. And that, around mobility in particular, that has a massive impact on the devices and applications that we use for work. So yeah, so to really kind of kick off, the main starting point of this webinar was to talk about what's happened in 2015. Let's take a look back. So we write our trends to watch reports every year, kind of have a little look into a crystal globe for the next year and predict what we think is going to happen. And I think at the end of last year, what we said was this: there was a major mismatch between what employers offer and what employees are actually doing around mobility, what devices they're using in particular. And we said that was going to carry on. And it wasn't hard to make that prediction because there was such a big gap. So this is year-old data, but so this is what we said and showed about this time last year. We went with one survey to employees around the world and said, okay, do you use your own smartphones, tablets, laptops for work? And you can see there in the red column pretty high percentages across each area. At the same time, we also did a survey of enterprise IT decision makers around in similar countries, asking them, what percentage of your employees are actually using their own devices. And as you can see, there's this massive mismatch there. There's a really big gap between what IT thinks is happening and what employees are actually doing. So when you see the size of that gap, it was hard to see it closing within a year. So our prediction for 2015 was that mismatch was still going to be there. Were we right? I think so. We haven't actually done a similar survey of decision makers yet this year, but we've just got some data in. Haven't even published it yet from our employee mobility survey. And what we found is there's still actually a pretty small percentage, or comparatively small percentage, of people who actually use their own devices of various kinds, smartphones, tablets, laptops, wearables this year as well, who have actually signed a corporate policy. So we know there's a lot of this activity still going on, but IT hasn't yet caught up with it. And I think that was reflected, Jonathan, in the poll results we saw there. But people still getting into, still kind of trying to find the right balance. But also, I think we might find that what I would think for a lot of people who have already implemented a policy, that might not yet be touching kind of every single employee out there. And I think this is what this data will show. We know that most businesses are interested in getting some kind of mobility policy in place.
Yeah, Richard, we find in many of the organizations we help that mobile, right, in the sense of actually mobile being leveraged in their environment, it's actually still a fairly small % of the overall employee population, right? So there's a lot of penetration left to go, and that's going to have additional concerns with organizations.
Yeah, and I think that's because mobile is now really, because we all have smartphones pretty much, especially through the Western world where there's 100% plus penetration in the consumer market. It's even if you're not considered necessarily a mobile worker, or you're not a field force worker, for instance, out and about all the time, people will have these devices and are finding ways to use them. Even if it's just to extend their day. So yeah, there's I think still a lot of unseen activity going on. And just to clarify on this as well, by the way, the wearable column there, so it looks like there's more people who have signed a policy. That's obviously that's a much smaller sample size. So obviously there's a lot fewer people who actually own those devices compared to the smartphone or tablet or indeed laptop market. But a large percentage of them do seem to have policies in place. But just to back up that point further, we also ask people what kind of strategy does their employer actually have. Now, we don't word it in these ways because we don't expect people to understand what COBO or BYOD or CYOD might mean. But essentially, we're saying, okay, does your employer give you a mobile phone and expect you to use that? Do they give you a choice of devices and let you use it for personal life as well? So that would be that CYOD and COPE. Or is there some kind of BYOD strategy in place? Do they kind of bury their heads in the sand and let you get on with it but don't really manage it? Or do they actually offer a range of devices that you can own and they can support? And what we found here really interestingly is, so of those people who do bring their own smartphone, 28.7% of them also state that that's not the policy that their business allows them, right? So either they're not allowed to use the device or they're given a corporate one of some kind. They're still going ahead and using their own devices. So I think that just, with almost 30% of BYO usage is against corporate policy. I think that's quite a hefty statement to make in terms of, this idea that there's still quite a big mismatch, a lot of behavior going under the radar for IT. So there's still work to do in terms of getting to grips with employee behavior and with the mobile devices they want to use. Now, there's obviously something Jonathan alluded to earlier as well. There's quite a big issue around security here, of course, and that's something we've been talking about for a few years. But when you've got a lot of these devices floating around, you don't necessarily know what data is sitting on them, what data is being used, which applications are being used. Are these an extra vector for malware into the corporate environment? What happens when someone leaves their phone in a taxi or on a train? I think that's the first reason to get a handle on this kind of behavior and start trying to crack down a bit more. Or I say crack down, offer some kind of alternative or management for this behavior. So that's kind of the device part for me. We've been, as I say, we don't want to dwell too long on BYOD because we've been talking about it for years. People know it's happening. It's just to emphasize there still is a mismatch going on, still work to do. So the next big thing that I think's really happened in 2015 has been the continued rise of B2E, business to employee, mobile apps. So employee-facing apps that help people do their job better. And so before we go a little further into that, I believe we have another poll question.
Yep. So thank you, Richard. And we do want to get into that. We want to get into apps, and we want to do it with a poll. So again, everyone on the line, we'd appreciate your participation here. How many mobile apps has your organization deployed to employees? We just want to get a sense, right? What is IT enabling? What are you as IT enabling in your environment for employees? None yet, right? We're not in the app game yet, but we're getting there. Between 1 and 5, 6 and 10, or more than 10. I want to clarify. We're not saying how many have you developed and deployed. This is just how many, from an IT perspective, are you actively distributing and supporting for your organization. And that's really what we're trying to get for this poll, to see, what is the pulse of the industry in respect here. I can share with you a minute that some of IBM's largest customers, it's not necessarily largest customers, it's heaviest app customers, are deploying and supporting up to 1,000 apps. Now, we know that's not the norm for organizations, but some organizations do have to scale up to 1,000 apps and support that. And a year or two ago, for them, that was not something they thought they were going to have to do. So apps really creep up on you fast. So let's see what the poll looks like. All right. So 20, really, let's just call it 23%, not there yet. Right, between 1 and 5 takes the majority here of 55%. Some have 6 to 10, and then this is pretty good. 16% of companies out there, just over 16%, are already managing more than 10 apps and distributing and supporting those apps. I like these numbers. Richard, do you want to comment to this at all?
Yeah, I think that looks about par for the course, I think, yeah, in terms of the other numbers that I've seen. Obviously, the customers that we speak to, there's a real range in kind of the level of uptake and adoption around apps at the moment. And yeah, having people I think are experimenting a lot, just deploying a few to start with, or beginning to think about it, through for 2016. And what I've talked about a bit this year, and kind of developed this model about how are we going to talk about mobile apps? What makes them exciting, or how do they actually go and transform business processes? We thought actually let's first take this idea, and I've heard it a few times, people talking about hero apps, and I think this is what we find with those people who have deployed, maybe in the range of 1 to 5 apps. So feel free to send questions into the Q&A or hints to say whether you agree with this or not. But we tend to think, mobility starts, beyond email with 1 or 2 hero apps that really apply to everyone across an organization. This might be something like expenses or travel booking. In our case at Ovum, a good one would be desk booking, so we can all make sure we get desks in our hot desking offices. Something that really applies to everyone and gets people thinking mostly about, okay, how can mobile actually change their everyday processes? Now, these hero apps are going to be potentially fairly expensive to develop and deploy and to maintain, because you want to make sure that they have high uptake, that they really work nicely and scale very well, especially in a big organization. But what I thought was what would make mobile really exciting is this idea that actually heroes should only be the first stop. What you really need is an army of apps, and each one, an army of soldier apps. And these soldier apps, you might hear them spoken of or referred to as task-specific or role-specific apps. They might be designed maybe only for a small team or for a certain department, just focusing on one type of process that just improves a work in practice. So for field force workers, for example, who need to replace paper forms when they're out and about checking assets in the field. So these might have a fairly small breadth of appeal, but also, they're likely, you want to make them individually cost not very much to either build or deploy or buy or maintain, because they might have to fail fast. If you're deploying lots and lots of apps, you can't expect every single one to work immediately. And also, of course, you want them to all be, have that kind of enterprise-grade security, so they can, communicate and safely share data with each other. Perhaps, self-secure, lock and wipe data. So it kind of apply MDM-style capability at the app layer. But yeah, we kind of see that as the concept, and then in terms of the maturity model, I think what we see is what develops with the businesses that deploy more and more is a virtuous circle of deployment. So once you've deployed 1 or 2 hero apps, and you start to get an idea of whether they actually work or not, you get end users then maybe understanding the potential for using those apps and becoming a bit more confident in terms of providing ideas to their line manager or to IT about, okay, here's another app that we could have. And then once you build or buy and then deploy new soldier apps, again, if you're able to analyze what difference they're actually making, then you can apply the learning into the next app that you build, and so on and so forth, until you kind of start building up until you have that kind of army of apps transforming processes across the board. No, as I said, that's a very nice concept, but it's much easier said than done.
Yeah, Richard, I wanted to make a point not only on this slide about the life cycle, but the previous slide too, and that is there are a lot of organizations that get started down the app kind of creation and management path. And one thing we find is that from a development perspective, developers are not focused on security. And so what you end up with, if you're not considering that from the start and figuring out how to incorporate security from the start, you end up with a bunch of applications that all of a sudden you're starting to say, well, how do we control if data is allowed to be taken from these apps and put somewhere else? Or how do we ensure that our users are authenticating properly to these apps and have the specific rights and the access to get access to the apps and then to the data? And so all of these things, if looked at and considered prior to actually starting to build the army of apps, it's fairly easy to do. I mean, IBM, we certainly help with that all the time, but it's a lesson learned regardless of what development platform you're using or how you're building those apps. Ensure that you're considering how some of these basic and even advanced security measures get incorporated into the apps from the start.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's part of, I think, a view on that I'll be coming to as well around how the market's developed on the supply side as well, how EMM or Enterprise Mobility Management is kind of starting to incorporate more and more of that platform play from the mobile app dev perspective, and why certain vendors do it and others don't. Yeah, absolutely. I think to have a whole army communicating, securely communicating with each other, you need probably one or two platforms that can set that up and think about security from the start. So yeah, absolutely agree with that.
Yep.
And what I would say, I mean, moving on in terms of the maturity of different businesses that we see, and like we saw with our audience today in terms of the numbers there have deployed, a few apps, we still see a few people in this kind of reactive phase, maybe just trying to react to the BYOD behavior they're seeing, thinking about deploying mobile device management, just trying to get a grip on BYOD. But then the next two phases, I think, is probably where the majority of people that we talk to are now. They're either kind of just starting to adopt different solutions and maybe trying out one or two hero apps, kind of building and deploying and really kind of moving up on this journey towards mobility as a transformative aspect or play for the organization. Where the goal is, I think, for many people is to have that kind of army of soldier apps. And as we've seen with the statistics, and as you mentioned, Jonathan, in terms of, you've seen with some of IBM's largest customers, there's only a few companies that I've really seen or spoken to that actually have that full model working, where you can really see evidence that users are coming back with ideas and they're being translated into new apps that are then being adopted. And that's come from businesses that have been talking, adopted solutions very early around BYOD. You can see where they are now. So there's a couple of really nice examples of companies that have deployed apps that have kind of hacking contests or have a kind of digital center of excellence or mobile center of excellence that allows people to share these ideas, and they go out and develop the app that gets the most votes, for instance, and come back and see it working in practice. Yeah, as I said, we've definitely seen a step change in 2015 for more people moving into this kind of adopt and build phase. 2016, I expect to see more seeing mobility as a really kind of transformative issue and aspect for their organization. And just finally, quickly on the app stage, just some more numbers to back that up. From what we've got from our survey coming in this year, just now, we asked this question, for individual employees, could you get access to apps through a corporate app store or portal? And yeah, we've got about 26% saying yes at the moment. So again, we might have more. There might be more companies actually doing it than 26% of companies. But in terms of how many users can actually get access to them so far, it's still pretty low. So again, as we said, there's still a way to go for most businesses in terms of kind of maturing their mobile strategy.
Yeah, and Richard, what we're seeing on that, maturing that mobile strategy, specifically with the apps, right, and getting access to those mobile apps, is self-service. When organizations are working to scale that, self-service becomes a big enabler. And not only for users to both, see the apps that are supported by IT, but also corporate app stores that allow collaboration, allow the employees within those organizations to actually place their own comments, their own feedback. So, you have someone who's in accounting looking through, or finance, and they're looking through other, reviews on apps there from other finance of folks in an organization, right? So it's helpful to find the apps that are helpful to do their roles, right? That's just one basic example, but the idea is a self-service app store that is enabling kind of collaboration as well.
Yeah, very useful, and it's good just to have that mechanism as well, like I said, to make sure people are able to feedback ideas and then also get access to the apps that just they need. And that again, that takes what we see and what we're used to in the consumer space with app stores. We see starting to happen more and more in the enterprise space because that's how we as people are used to working, right? So on the supply side, something we've heard a lot this year, talking to people, is this idea of the digital workspace. And that's embracing this idea that basically, work is something we do now. It's not somewhere we go. So we can do it from anywhere, especially for knowledge workers. I say this just in terms of our enterprise customer kind of incoming queries. I've got a lot more about kind of cross-platform IT management and security. And that means not just talking about how do we manage smartphones and BYOD. It's, okay, how do we incorporate this into our wider kind of laptop and end-user computing environment. So, this idea of the digital workspace is about providing anytime access to any application or on any device. And that's really, what I'd call the natural evolution of the enterprise mobility management market. I think we're probably likely to even stop talking about enterprise mobility management maybe over the next couple of years and, call it digital workspace or end-user computing. My personal opinion, you may differ, Jonathan, but I think, that it's, for me, that's the natural way the market is going. And you can see that in terms of what the vendors are doing as well, and how the market is shaken out. So we know, enterprise mobility it's about so much more than MDM, right? Mobile device management is practically a commodity. What we're looking at and seeing is more and more cross-platform application development. So when we're talking about that need for a platform to actually go and build security in from the outset and let apps communicate with each other, really kind of develop those custom apps that people want. We're seeing more and more of that, what we'd call MADP, mobile app dev platforms, creeping in and across into the mobility management space, and a lot of vendors offering dual capabilities. And that means, making apps available not just on all the different smartphone and tablet operating systems, whether iOS or Android or Windows now, but across PCs and Macs as well. The key thing that underpins all of this now is identity and access management, and that's really underpinning the security across all the devices, knowing who the user is and what they should have access to, no matter what type of device they're using, what operating system it is. That's the really key thing that I think vendors are driving towards. And then we'd see not so much a real move away from this idea of just managing devices, particularly because in the end, again, devices are more of a commodity. They're very cheap for companies to buy comparatively. Users get a new one every 6 months, some of them, or every 1 or 2 years. What's really important for the enterprise is the content and the data on them. So applying that kind of content management and file level security is what's going to be really important to manage data in this new, absolutely multi-screen world. Yeah,
and Richard, as we look at some of the transition that's happening that you refer to as digital workspace, we as IBM, we won't get caught up on what we call this thing, right? EMM. We know and agree MDM is a commodity, right? But yet it's interesting, even as that's a commodity, it's still a core component to how devices are managed, right? So EMM, right? EMM keeps expanding its definition and its relevancy because it keeps putting in these different mobile technologies, and you covered that: identity and access management, content management, and file level security. So it's a great thing. But what I want to remind our listeners today and viewers is everything is being driven by new and innovative use cases within their environments, right? That is a lot of where the requirements are coming from? Or how can I manage, a set of users in this particular way for this particular use case? And we love that, right, as a vendor, because it means organizations are treating an enterprise building management platform as this strategic core piece of tool that's enabling all things mobile. And it's a win-win for everyone, but more importantly, it's great to see these innovative use cases come out, and that mobile is not just, a term, right? It is a meaningful and significant piece of an organization today.
Yeah, and I think I'd agree with that, and I think what I've got on this slide here is to talk about how that has actually had an impact on the competitive markets, on IBM competitors in the EMM space. What that market looks like now is very different to what it was at the beginning of 2015. I think it's really matured because it's expanded. The definition of mobility management has taken on all these new kind of clauses and like you're saying, new innovative ways of working and how to manage them. So what we're seeing actually, like most mature markets, is it's now pretty much dominated by mega vendors, of which obviously we include IBM. Mass 360 down as one of the leaders in last year's Open Decision Metrics in the space with I think 4 others. But when I look at that market this year with so much consolidation, there's probably only 1 or 2 what you would call pure EMM specialists left who haven't been acquired or become part of a much bigger business. Otherwise, and we see new entrants or people trying to make a lot of noise with the likes of, say, Microsoft or Oracle alongside IBM, VMware, and Citrix. It really is a space where there's not really much room for the little guys left. So from that point of view, it's become a really mature market. And the reason that's happened, I think, is because these vendors are able to incorporate that mobility management into their wider offering around trying to provide that digital workspace, the any device on any app, anytime, with enterprise grade security and being able to scale it up to a large audience. So that's very quickly that's kind of my view on the competitive landscape, and I think we'll see that shifting not too much more, I guess, in through 2016. I think most of the consolidation in that market has happened. I'll probably let myself in for it there. Famous last words, something massive will happen in January. But, that would just be a continuation of the trend that, it's a really mature market now. Mobility fits in. It doesn't exist in a vacuum, and the vendors who can offer solutions, I think pretty much all will understand that. So that's mainly been a look at what has happened in 2015, how that's set up 2016. So, the next part of the webinar really is to talk about what are the cool new trends that we're seeing around technology or services in 2016, what's going to happen. So again, to introduce this, and this may give you a clue about something I'll talk about, but we have another poll question to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, great. And again, we appreciate everyone's participation in the poll. So this one is a little foretelling. Who is driving wearable adoption in the workplace? And you can select all of that apply here. So who's driving the adoption in the workplace, right? Who are you seeing wearing these devices? Who is asking you as IT to procure them, if they are? Employee, BYO wearable, bring your own wearable. You're getting that mahogany row swooping in and saying, hey, what about that nice fancy watch I see, sitting on the shelves? I need you to buy a couple of those for us. Do you have a formal wearable program implemented, and that's driving, right, the adoption? Or, no formal policy or program in place. We have yet there, right? So wearables is something everyone knows is around. I feel most organizations don't know the impact or the use case to use wearables right now because it's such an early market. But I think formal policies will be at some point provided. So let's see what our polling looks like. Okay. The majority,
Yep.
76%, no formal policy or program in place yet. Richard, any of this a shock?
No. It's a very new, these devices are kind of trickling in. Very new, very immature market, fairly, relatively low adoption in the consumer space. And like you said, for a lot of them, no real kind of killer app in the enterprise yet. But that's not to say there won't be one, or we won't see one emerging in 2016. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that the folks we're speaking with from an IT side, everyone is curious and following the market pretty carefully, but no one has yet to see that use case, right? And outside of checking a message once in a while on your wrist, no one's really seemed to see where it's going to be used and leveraged to improve or make an impact on workflows just yet.
Yeah. So it saves a bit of time, but it isn't massively transforming the way people work. I think that's the key point here when I think about wearables. I think there's a bit of a difference. So if you think about the different types of wearables people own, smartwatches are the biggest ones, right? So the Apple Watch, Samsung Gear, most of the vendors have got them. They're all tethered to these whatever smartphone operating system you happen to have. And so for the first time this year, we've been running the survey for 4 years. For the first time this year, we incorporated questions about wearable usage at work. So we went out and asked employees across multiple different markets, what devices they use. 7.7% of employees say that they're using their own wearable device for work. Now that's a much lower percentage than smartphones or tablets. They're around about 50%. But that is actually around 47% of employees who actually do own a wearable. So what this kind of makes me think is, as we saw with smartphones and tablets, the real primary route into the enterprise market was through BYOD. I think that's changing slightly. We're seeing BYOD drop off a little bit in favor of things like choose your own device. But definitely for things like wearables, because there's not that killer app, there's not that real use case that's going to transform business processes. Businesses haven't started to deploy many of these yet, so they're going to rely on people using their own and might just try and manage that. But I agree. There's nothing that's really kind of making businesses think we must adopt these devices for everyone right now. But they might be handy for those who like to use them in their consumer life. For me, what will be different potentially is in the heads-up display or HUD space. So for most people, this means things like Google Glass. Now, as we've known, heads-up displays haven't really taken off in the consumer space. Google Glass was a bit of a flop. They didn't really pass the creep factor, I would say. People weren't very comfortable with the idea that you could start filming them at any point. And maybe they just weren't fashionable enough. But for whatever, for various reasons, Google Glass didn't really take off in the consumer space. However, there have been some really cool functions that we've seen in the workspace for things like heads-up displays. And these are essentially for people like surgeons or engineers who might need to access some pretty complex data or even some fairly uncomplex data, but don't have the use of their hands. They want to be able to use voice control or gesture control. But for surgeons, for instance, they can't go, or it costs a lot of money every time they take off their gloves if they want to go and find some data about a patient they're working on. They need to go and scrub up again, take that bit of time, look up the data. If they could just have that in front of their face and still carry on working, that would be great. Likewise for in aviation, for jet engineers who have to use anti-static gloves and therefore can't use touchscreen devices. Again, having that kind of data up in front of their eyes will be very useful. So whereas you're not likely to see much BYOD activity going on with these things, we could also take a look at things like Microsoft HoloLens, or I've seen some pretty cool companies. There's one I came across at an event a couple of months ago called Avec, who are kind of developing kind of augmented reality goggles. You can play around with an Android tablet just using gestures. a virtual Android tablet in front of your eyes. They're going to find some really niche applications, but it's not very widespread. Like I said, this isn't for the standard knowledge worker. This is for particular use cases at work. But I expect to see more of that, or just to really start picking up a bit in 2016. Not to say a mass market, but we'll see more and more use cases and case studies of people actually using these devices to keep their hands free. So that's the kind of wearable prediction. The other service that we're starting to see a lot more interest, and again, I've just had a whole spate of incoming requests about this from our enterprise customers, and split billing. And again, this has kind of been driven by BYOD and also from legal rulings towards the end of last year, actually in California, but it's just still taking time to trickle through. This idea that people want to kind of efficiently reimburse costs for the usage of personal devices. I think a lot of businesses have tried playing around with stipends or allowances every month. Hasn't really worked that well. They're either underpaying or overpaying, and it's just not very efficient. And then, of course, you've got businesses in California being told they have to, reimburse personal data and voice usage. And I believe we may also see some similar rulings in multiple other states in the U.S., at least, which have similar labor law as in California. And as we know, in much of this market, where the U.S. leads, the rest of the world may follow. You expect to see this kind of thing becoming best practice. So we're seeing a kind of like I said, a lot of growth in interest, people wanting to be able to split their bills. And this means that then on the supply side, you've got a lot more vendors growing up to meet that demand. But also the operators and the carriers trying to provide split billing opportunities, and that'll also help them, if they're able to essentially sell two numbers, one to their employee base or their corporate base, and one into the consumer base. And the final thing for me really, I just want to recap, is security is a key issue. Now, I wouldn't say this is a new trend for 2016, but it certainly underpins and kind of you can talk about through everything that we've spoken about so far around device usage, around application usage, and also it taps into the wider trend that we're seeing at the moment around security being a really heavy issue for a lot of people. We know, I think in the UK at least, something like 90% of large enterprises were hacked this year. And mobile is just another vector for attackers to get at you. So from our large-scale decision-maker survey, we found that 55 or 55.8% of the people that we surveyed across the globe had identified security and identity and privacy as basically as number 2 of their overall IT priorities. Really, mobile devices just do much more than email now. So mobile security is impossible to ignore. And I think you've probably got a bit more to say on this as well, Jonathan, but we really think security is built into strategic thinking around mobility now, and maybe that's why we still see so many of you kind of wrestling with that issue of kind of getting everything in place around BYD. How do you actually secure this properly is the key question that most people want to have before they go and implement a solution.
Richard, I completely agree with that last bullet. And what we're hearing and seeing from organizations is a shift. It's not a shift in a negative way, right? At some point when mobile devices were becoming so popular, we saw IT turning a bit of a blind eye to security, right? Hey, we'll give you access to all this stuff, and it was pretty open. But that changed quickly, especially over the last, I'd say, 12 months. But more now, the trend in the next 12 to 18 months is we're going to continue giving users access to everything they need on mobile devices. Why? Because we see it's strategic to our business. We see the impact it's having in workflows. We see what it's doing from a competitive standpoint. But what they're not doing is they're not just doing it blindly. They are figuring out how to do it with security in mind that does not affect usability and the purpose of mobile. And it's exciting. Yeah, it really is. So I guess I'll take over for just a couple minutes here, and I want to mention from an IBM security perspective, we look at a security framework, right? How do we provide IT what they're telling us is needed? Protection for devices, right? Protection around applications and the data associated with those applications, and that also includes privacy, right? Separating personal and work, handling BYOD use cases. So you have the device, you have the application, and the data associated with that application secure. You're really looking at, okay, now how are we enabling content? Right? How are we giving them access to all of their Word documents, PowerPoints? Are we enabling them to edit it, to store it securely, both offline on their mobile devices, and also keep that data in sync, right? So if they're accessing documents on their iPad, and then later on they need that same document on their mobile phone, and they need the same document on their PC, how are those documents staying in sync? And then where security has even kind of doubled down is how do organizations ensure that employees are actually managing and getting access to what they need to and getting authenticated and authorized to do so in a convenient manner, something that doesn't take weeks to do, but something that for every user they can set up very easily and then manage going forward. All of that in this framework is underpinned by having security intelligence, right? Being able to actually have visibility into all these transactions, these accesses that are taking place by users and their devices, and ensuring that, you know, if they're getting access to what they need, but is there anything crazy going on, right? Is there an anomaly? Is there something out of whack that is showing that, hey, this could actually be fraudulent, this could be an issue, this could be a problem to our network or to our data, and flagging that problem and even taking automated actions on it with this intelligence. That's really the framework from an IBM security perspective. But it really boils down to this, right? When we look at enterprise mobility management, just pure EMM, right? We're really talking about being able to do that device management, having the ability to have what we call secure productivity suite, right? The ability to have a trusted workplace container, right? A container for email, calendar, and contacts that's secure, policies around that container to either allow or not allow users to copy email or data within an email and paste it out to, you know, a third-party cloud file sharing service that's not authorized, and really ensure that corporate data stays where it should, to enable them to have access to it on that device, but keep it where it's authorized to go and not where it's not. We talked about in the previous slide the framework that enables, you know, the ability to access and share and edit documents. We call that secure document sharing. And even what we didn't touch on too much today, really about other threats, right? Advanced threats, malware. Malware on smartphone and tablets is becoming to be an issue. Whether it's adware, whether it's SMS senders, whether, you know, regardless of what those threats are from a malware perspective, being able to address it in an easy way. And that's incorporated into EMM solutions. So what we do with Mobile First Protect, IBM Mobile First Protect, is although you may be on a path that you want everything, right? You want to provide access, you want to push apps, you want to have a container, you want to have malware protection. That's great. We'll sell that to you, we'll support it, and you'll love our product. But if you're only at the stage where you need the basic device management, you're experimenting with containers, you're not ready to provide document access, but you want malware, we will enable you in any combination. We'll make it easy to try our product, we'll make it easy to buy our product, and we'll make it really easy for you to add the modules that you need as your business and your users in those innovative use cases dictate. Really easy. And that really comes down to having something that is strategic tool and system for your business. So Mobile First Protect on IBM is comprehensive. We covered that in the last couple slides. In fact, it covers almost everything Richard talked about today that builds upon why, you know, EMM is important because of where it has been in 2015 and where it's going. Something scalable, both, you have to think about both in volume of devices and users, volume of apps that you're going to scale to or that you may scale to, and also something that's integrated with your existing systems. You have a mail system and solution that you've invested heavily in probably. Right? You need a solution that's integrated into that. You might have your own document solution. You might have SharePoint. You might invest in Box for cloud file sharing. You need a solution that integrates into those different systems and applications, both from a productivity perspective as well as a security perspective. And that's what Mobile First Protect does, and we do it very easily. All right. So some of you have sent in some questions. We really appreciate that. We've got just a couple minutes here to hit on a couple. Richard, the first two look like they're going to be in your court. William wrote, why is there still a mismatch between employee behavior and IT policy? So if you're comfortable, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, I guess that one, they're coming early. I think, like I said, there's still these issues around security, how to actually go and find the right solution. I think there's been quite a confusing competitive or supply-side environment to go and find, do you want MDM, do you want containerization, do you want MAM? Is it fine just to go with a virtualization? There's been such a range that it's been very hard for IT, I think, often to actually to decide, okay, which is the best policy to go with here, especially because really needs to be a different solution for each different type of deployment that you go with. So BYOD might not necessarily suit virtualization, but MDM or MAM might be really good for it. Whereas if you have a corporate-owned, business-only environment, highly secure functionality, you might want to go with a different type of solution. So I think IT's just been playing catch-up, really, to employee behavior. It came as a bit of a shock. I don't think many people saw the smartphone and tablet markets coming, and they're still just trying to work out, okay, how do we actually secure them properly in the enterprise? And I think also there's just that maybe a misunderstanding of quite the range or the scale of the behavior, that this is not something that people who are just mobile workers do. This is something that basically every employee is now able to do. They now have access to these really powerful devices. So IT is constrained in a lot of ways, I think, in terms of how it fits into the wider business in many organizations, and it's still just kind of playing real catch up there.
Yep, and we saw in the poll, right? I mean, the first poll of the day, the icebreaker poll of the day was, I'm talking about, struggling with the balance of BYOD, right? I think we're all trying to understand employee behavior and IT policy, and you have traditional policy, right, which was always very strict on what users could do, and you have what's more realistic on mobile. And a perfect example, and I don't know 100% of how each IT firm solves this, but even a corporate device, who I know, like my personal device is a corporate provided device, I still take personal pictures on that device, right? And I don't think that's natural, right? You're going to bring up an internet browser and browse to your websites and whatever your favorite websites are. So these are things that is probably acceptable, right, on a corporate IT policy perspective, but organizations need to understand, regardless of whether a device is personally owned or corporate owned, for example, there are certain innate things we're going to do on these devices, and that should be acceptable in many cases. I'm sure some are not. Okay, we have a time, I think, for one other question here. Richard, I'll give this one to you too to see if you have something here. Do you have any good examples of role-specific apps working in practice? I think this is going back to your, apps, army of apps.
Yeah, so this is the great thing about apps, right? There's no way that I could identify every single one, or that any one person could, right? Because this comes down to individual processes individuals get on with a daily basis. I've been working with a colleague actually on a case study just over the last couple of weeks of it's a workforce management scheme in a smart meter provider in Italy. And so they've got this very large field force of engineers who have to be able to go out and check smart meters, monitor smart meters that they're working properly. that they're communicating the data correctly back into their back end. So yeah, this is a constantly mobile workforce, and previously they've had to either use rugged devices or go and do a manual check on a meter and then type it up on a laptop or take it back to the office and print out forms. What they've managed to do now is implement a mobile app that essentially replaces a lot of those forms. Or it's actually, you could probably call it several mobile apps, an app per form. So they're able to actually go and, instead of kind of having that extra step in needing to fill out a form and then upload it at a later point, just fill it out directly on their smart device, whether tablet or smartphone, and have that automatically connect into their back end and say, hey, everything's right, or this needs fixing, or I have fixed, and then tell you what your next job is as an engineer and move on, and direct you to the next location you need to be. And I think that's a pretty common thing that I've seen in terms of field management. You can apply that not just in engineering, but in utilities, seen it with emergency services and healthcare, anywhere where people have lots of jobs to do around different, across different locations. This is really replacing forms, and I've seen some examples where it takes about 50, it uses up 50% less of someone's time. So that just makes them incredibly more efficient.
Great. Thank you, Richard. So I want to do a clarifying question. Mark asked this. Mark said, hey, he's a little unclear. IBM Mobile First Protect, MAS 360, which is usually what folks are associating with joining these webinars. When IBM acquired FiberLink, way back in December 2013, we started transitioning the name slowly from MAS 360 to Mobile First Protect. And so they are one and the same. Mobile First Protect is MAS 360. We always apologize if we're confusing the market, but I wanted to make that point clear. If you're looking for additional information, you could search on Mobile First Protect or MAS 360. Richard, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you being our guest, and I will turn it over to Kayla to wrap us up.
All right, and thank you both for a great presentation, and to the rest of you for joining today. Just a quick reminder that you will be receiving an email that will provide you access to the recording and slides for today's event. That way you can review anything you missed or share it with others. So on behalf of our presenters and the rest of us here at IBM, we hope you enjoyed today's presentation and have a productive and secure rest of your day. Thanks again.